All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is KristaLyn Sophia. I am your friendly astrologer and folk magician, and this is our Monday Magic Mood Boost, but it's a pretty special one because it's also going to be the Alchemist Inkwell episode. So welcome to the Alchemist Inkwell podcast. This is your spiritual podcast for grounded people. As I said, I'm KristaLyn. Emily is going to be doing a live that will be shared as a featured podcast episode soon. So this is actually our way of kind of making sure we don't miss content for you all while we are in Egypt. So the situation today is that you will be getting a live broadcast from me. We're going to cover the end of Mars retrograde. We're going to cover the beginning of Venus retrograde. And then by the time we get back and are back together with Em and myself, we'll start covering more about the eclipses and more about the Aries ingress as well. So it is good to see you. What you're going to hear if you're listening to this podcast or if you're watching is me occasionally saying hi to the people in the chat because they're awesome. And some of them, it's really exciting, are actually going to be in Egypt. Actually, of the 4 people, all of whom are beautiful and wonderful people in the chat, I know 3 of them are actually going to be in Egypt. I think maybe even in the same week. So good morning to Danny, Jet, Angela, Liz, Misty, and Rocio. Great to see you. Amber is here. Amber is our mod. So if I miss a question or something, Amber will help me get back to it, and we will make sure we cover all of that. This is going to be really fun. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Jackie. I'm excited about this episode because, first of all, I want to celebrate with all of us. Mars is direct, everybody. Mars is direct. You survived. Good morning, Kay. It is the best kind of morning. I went to bed last night about 15 minutes before 9 p.m. And Mars stationed direct last night around literally 8:59 p.m. Eastern time, which was the 23rd of February, the day I'm recording this. And yeah, bye-bye Mars. Actually, more like hello Mars. Welcome back Mars. Get your act together Mars. That's the kind of feeling that we've got going on. So now we have this really lovely situation where we've got a couple days where all the planets, all of them, even the outer planets, are direct. The only slight caveat to that is, of course, Mars just started moving direct. Like it's going to take him a while to even get off the degree he's on. And at the same time, the end of this 5 or 6 days that we get of all planets direct brings Venus into retrograde. These are the 2 planets that actually retrograde the least frequently. And the fact that they're doing one right after the other is a special event, right? I'm going to say special so that it feels a little bit more endurable, because retrogrades are by nature frustrating, right? We are a society of people who loves forward momentum. We love progress. We love new things, making things happen, or at least keeping things the way that they are, the way that we're comfortable with them. Retrogrades will pull us backwards, will redraw paths, will take back what they gave, what the planets gave when they covered the degrees the first time. So I'm going to give you all of the key dates of Venus's retrograde, the one coming up, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to demystify it, and we're going to take a little bit of the potential anxiety out of it. You're going to be hearing about this from your social media astrologers. They're going to tell you to be aware of breakups. They're going to tell you that your friends may stab you in the back. They're going to tell you a lot of different things. And for some of us, this may be true. But for all of us together, we're not all living this in the same singular life, right? We're not all in the same singular life timeline. Some people are going to feel it more than others, and I'll tell you exactly how to know about that as well. So we've got plenty of time to go through this. At the same time, I'm going to make sure that I try to weave in answering your questions so that anything my astrology fixed brain doesn't think of, hopefully the people watching today will help me cover that as well. And we'll cover most, if not, hey, all of your questions, especially when it comes to Venus retrograde. Now, if you've got general questions, throw them into the chat. I will do my best to work them in too. I'm pretty good at segues, so we'll test that skill today of how I can maybe answer a question and then also make it relate back to our focused topic. So let me just jump in here and say hello to some people. Christina's here. It's so good to see you. Magical Moon Gang. I really like that. That's a great name for this group. Yeah, driving right over those speed bumps. That's a really great way to encapsulate Mars retrograde for sure, Misty. It's good to see everybody. Hi, Brittany. feeling much invigorated today. I did wake up feeling better today. Sleep was rough over the weekend as Mars slid to a halt, getting ready to move forward again. I don't know if it was just the Mars retrograde period and my sleep will get better, or if it's other situations that in my life tied perfectly, like to the day, with Mars's cycle of Mars retrograde. And this is because, and maybe this is where we'll get into this first, this is because Mars, for me and for the person that was also involved in the story of Mars retrograde in my world, we both had very prominent Mars energies, not only in our personal timing techniques, which when we talk about timing techniques, what we're doing is we're taking the chart, your natal chart. And if you want to think about it as like a ball of yarn, when you're born, you start pulling on that thread of that ball of yarn. And you can think about the placements in your chart as little knots in that ball. And every once in a while, you pull out one of those knots. And so that becomes the main focus of your life for that period of time. That knot would represent a planet taking over rulership of that period of your life. There are many ways a planet can do this. There are multiple timing techniques, and several astrologers over the millennia have posited ways that we could create sort of a PEMDAS order of operations situation of which one to prioritize and how to sort of narrow it down over periods of time. I have studied it a lot, and so I get into it a lot, and I do it for my clients individually, and I also do it for the world, which is world astrology, also known as mundane astrology. So in that, we end up doing periods where, Mars could be retrograde, but it may not affect you. There have been Mars retrogrades in your life where you had no idea something was going on. That's not a bad thing. However, if you are a person living in the United States this year, Mars had rulership from 2024 March to 2025 March. We're still in it. And so Mars retrograde hit the US a little bit more poignantly, a little bit more directly than it may have if Mars weren't the ruler of the year for us. The same goes for individuals. Some of us have Mars taking the reins or holding the microphone at certain levels of our timing. And so when I look at the year for myself and this other person, and I noticed a lot of stuff that was happening to us was lining up with Mars's timeline, I thought, okay, Mars must be highlighted somewhere. Where is this so that I can align with it, so I can work with it, right? And of course, I found it on multiple levels. And I took it to my mentor for some peer review, as I always do. And we found it there as well. And then when things resolved just days before Mars direct, we kind of got our answer that yes, this was the timeline we're working with. And now I'm looking at Venus retrograde and saying, okay, well, how important is she in both of our charts, in both of our timings for this year? And so it's a matter of, is it both of us that are going to be going through something? Is it one of us? And then like, if it's not me, I can play the support role, or what, that kind of tells you it's your script for what your role is during this drama that unfolds. So going to take a break again and dive back in. That's a little bit of how we kind of apply timing techniques in astrology. And we call it metaphorical time for the most part. If a planet is the time lord, it's because of a metaphorical or non-real time situation that we are pulling out again from that ball of yarn. However, the real time, the transiting planet is doing something and it has rulership. So we take that into account for exact moments within the year, within the month, within whatever epoch of time we're working with, to say this is when a big plot is going to develop, part of this story. So cool. So it looks like the conversation in the chat is going really well. Christina, my dog slept in our bed all night, and I think it was to keep my husband in bed too. He's a restless sleeper. I actually have a king size mattress that I share with 2 corgis, and I only get a sliver of it. So I hope you guys got to rest really comfortably. I would love to. Okay, Jessa is asking a really great question, and it's on topic with where I'm at right now, so I'm going to address it. I would love to hear your thoughts on a retrograde planet at the time of your birth. Jessa, this is a great question. It is what you hear on social media, right? What you hear on social media is that if you have a Mercury retrograde in your birth chart, Mercury retrogrades are easier for you. This is not true. I can speak from experience. And here's the thing, because Mercury is actually the planet that goes retrograde the most, there is like there's a 25% chance at any given moment, I think, that Mercury is going to be retrograde, because Mercury goes retrograde 4 times a year or so, which means that if you were born during the year, there's a 25% chance that you were born in one of those 4 times that Mercury was retrograde every year. So a vast majority of us do have Mercury retrograde. And therefore, it should not be as popular for Mercury retrograde to be as annoying as it is, because that leaves like a large amount of the population saying, hey, this is easy. What are you complaining about? But it's not enough, right? So again, a retrograde planet in the birth chart, according to tradition, is going to unfold its events slower. This is because the retrograde planet is not actually moving backwards in the sky. It's only moving backwards from our vantage point in the universe, right? So I'm going to do a visual here, and I'm going to try to explain it as verbally as I can. But we're going to imagine that the viewer is Earth. Okay, I'm going to explain Mercury retrograde, which also will apply to Venus retrograde. The other planets, I'm going to have to make myself Earth. So we'll start with you all being Earth. So what we have here is your Earth. My little cube here that I'm going to hold is going to be the sun, just because it's bigger. I have another cube, which is really ironic since everything is spherical out there. But my smaller cube is going to be Mercury in this case. So if you are Earth and I have Mercury going in a circle around the sun, both of which are in front of you, you're going to perceive that in 2D, right? You're not going to see the depth change of Mercury. You might notice it because it gets bigger and smaller. But if I'm doing this, Mercury for you does not look like it's going in a circle. It looks like it's going back and forth. So if I do it this way and I hold my little square and I have Mercury on the opposite side of the sun, and then I bring it around, it's closer to Earth. So it's a little bit bigger. This is that apparent magnitude we hear about in astronomy. This is also what factors into our ability to have eclipses the way that we do. And so the apparent magnitude of Mercury will get bigger because it's closer to Earth on the interior between the Earth and the sun. But when it goes behind the sun again, it's going to appear smaller, and it's going to appear to just be retracing this line that it's been doing. So when it's between us, that's actually the retrograde. That's what they consider the retrograde, when it appears to be moving backwards by degrees across the sky. And when it's on the opposite side of the sun, not always blocked out by the sun directly, but certainly you don't look at it because you'd be blinded by the sunbeams. So it does disappear for a while, and it comes back out on the other side, as all the planets do when they get to that point in their synodic cycle, or their cycle around the sun. And so you have a planet that just appears from our perspective to just be going back and forth like a windshield wiper, when really there's third dimensional depth there that we don't get to see from our vantage point. If we were looking top down, we would get to see it, but that's not what we see here, right? So because we have our vantage point from standing on Earth and marveling at the sky, we do have to kind of remember that there's depth out there, that it is deep in space. And so outer planets, because they're beyond Earth and the sun, they will have like a full cycle. They'll be on the other side of Earth, where Mercury and Venus don't really get to that side. They don't cross over Earth's orbit to go beyond us, right? So those planets have a different way of noticing when they're going to be retrograde, but they also do appear to go backwards, Mars included, right? So Mars appeared recently to be going backwards in the sky, even though Mars was just progressing on Mars's normal orbit. So when you have this in your natal chart, Mars retrogrades every 2-ish years or so. Venus retrogrades every 1.5 years or so. The outer planets retrograde every year. And they have like one long retrograde each year that lasts months. And then Mercury will retrograde 3 or 4 times a year. The moon does not retrograde because it's orbiting us. So we're always seeing it go the way it normally would because it's going around us. We don't have to deal with it moving back and forth around another circular point. So if you have a retrograde planet in your chart, you're going to look at what that planet signifies as a planet in general. So Venus would be, friendship, the arts, valuables, beauty, that kind of stuff, romance. Mercury would be commerce, merchant stuff, calculations, learning, communication styles. Mars might be ambition, challenges, those kinds of things. And so you'd say, okay, Mars does that, but how well does Mars do it in my life? Remember, you are specific because you have your specific natal chart. So you would want to say Mars, who does these things, the character Mars has this personality, and we know it pretty well. And Pluto also does retrograde. Yep. Um, and so Mars is going to be retrograde in your chart. And if you're having a Mars return right now, which means Mars is at the place now where Mars was when you were born, then Mars is actually in the sign where Mars doesn't get to Mars very well. This is the sign of Cancer, where Mars is considered to be in his fall. And so he's not able to function very well. He doesn't have the reputation he needs or the support he needs to be able to do things in the martial way. He's in a watery sign. He's a hot and dry planet. He wants to light fires and he's getting doused, right? So Mars doing all these challenges and things, those challenges are going to show up in more of a watery way because that's the environment Mars finds himself in. And so those significations of your Mars in that environment doing those actions may unfold later in life than for anybody else or for other people who might have Mars direct. The promises of Mars will come later or slower than typical. And they might show up in unconventional ways because Mars is not moving conventionally. So that's really all we're looking at. We're looking at the nature of the planet and how it's moving. And it's a lot simpler and a lot more grounded than how sometimes it gets explained on social media today. So yeah, I hope that that helps. Again, if you want to look into this in your personal chart, reach out to me. We can schedule a consultation. I'll explain it to you in a way that's very personal to you, that makes sense for you and your chart. But that's the general idea. All right, let me catch up a little bit here. How do you tell by looking at your chart if a planet's retrograde? It's either going to be red or it's going to have a little RX or R, like as a sub. Um, yeah, what's it called when there's like something is squared and the number is up at the top? It's actually going to have it down below, kind of attached to it. So either the planet will be red on the chart, or it will be in a place where it's kind of at the bottom of the planet and it's a little R or a little RX. Depends on what program you're using. People use it differently. So for instance, if I look at the chart right now on Luna, if I jump ahead to actually, do you want me to share my screen and I can show you guys this and then we can talk about Venus retrograde as well. Hopefully my face won't get in the way of stuff, but what we'll do is our best, honestly, but we'll take a look at this and I'll show you how it works. Cool. Yes, please. Cool. Mine had an R at the bottom of all 5. That's interesting to me. There are periods of time where all 5 planets, so that'd be Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, might be retrograde at the same time. That would be a really cool chart I would love to look at. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my chart. I did something that I'm hoping makes it easier, but you guys tell me if this is working well. Okay, so yeah, and then my face is still covering it and I can't move it. That's such a bummer. Okay, so that's okay. As you can see, most of our planets are up in the upper hemisphere of this chart anyway, so we don't have to worry about anything down there. My face is actually not blocking anything. So what we're seeing here is Venus right there is, hang on, I'm going to make sure you can see it on here. Venus here, she's direct right now. The only thing on this chart that is retrograde is going to be the nodes of the moon because they're always retrograde. That's just how they move. It's a whole other talk. It's a whole other thing. But if we take Venus here and we go to our event navigator and say, okay, when's Venus going to go in a direction change? Retrograde. She will move RX right there on March 1st, 2005. And we can actually click here and see it. And now we look at Venus and she is red. And that indicates in this program that she is retrograde. The cool thing about this program also is it does have that little RX there. So you can see it. You'll see it on the nodes there too. So that's a really good indicator. You'll see something similar to that in most programs. Yeah, so a lot of us are going to have retrograde planets in the chart. It's kind of rare for all planets to be direct. So we have, 6 days of it right now before we go into another period where Venus is going to go retrograde. In that time, Mercury is going to go retrograde. After that, we're going to start looking at some of the outer planets, thinking about going retrograde. It's a lot. So don't worry. We actually might have a period where all planets are direct later in the year, but it's a really nice time when they are. And so we really enjoy it. The unique thing about right now, and I am going to return us to today. So let me just bring it up here. There we go. All the planets are direct on the chart today. But what we'll notice is that Mars has literally, and Mars is down here in Cancer, There we go. Mars is at 17 degrees of Cancer, where Mars now stationed direct since last night. But Mars is going to hang out there for a while because, like, if you've ever had a really slow day where everything exhausted you, do you jump out of bed the next morning and go for a run? I mean, sometimes you might, and good for you. But a lot of us will need that rest. So we take our time getting back up to it's kind of like a locomotive, right? The locomotive was chugging along, stopped, and now we have to pick up momentum again. And it's the same thing for the planets. In the sky, they are going to pick up in their speed. Again, they are not zipping through the sky faster in actual space in astronomy. What they are doing is, from our perspective, covering distance more in our sky. So Mars is picking up speed from our vantage point, but Mars is going around the sun the way Mars usually does. There is no chaotic situation here. It's actually very predictable. We could have predicted it thousands of years ago. We can today predict thousands of years in the future, all of this stuff. It's really easy and predictable, which is one of the things I like about it. So what we have there is Mars at 17 degrees. Venus is at 10 degrees. Now, if I click on her, right, we know that she is going to go retrograde later this week, and she is at 10 degrees. So that's two planets that aren't moving this week. So while all the planets are direct, two of them, Mars and Venus, are not moving, like maybe a couple minutes of a degree, right? Like inching. And so it's a lot of standing still energy as one planet picks up momentum and begins moving forward, and the other one slows down to a point of actually moving backwards. So that's the kind of thing we want to keep in mind as we're navigating this week. If it feels like relationships, goals, ambitions, our creativity is standing still, it's hard to express ourselves because we're just sort of stuck in a moment. That's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. The energy is that wonky. It's a situation that we find ourselves in. So the best thing you can do, perhaps, is to say, like, okay, I have a moment of stillness that I am given right now. What am I going to do with this moment of stillness? Do I bide my energy? Do I make plans for what I'll do? You could try to bust through creativity blocks. That's an option if you have like a deadline or you feel so called. But I'm actually going to take this time and try to understand stillness, which is not my nature. So hopefully that helps as well. I'm going to pop around here because I do see that I've got some questions that I want to bring in. Let's see. So Mars can be retrograde, Christina. The sun cannot be retrograde, and Jupiter can be retrograde. The sun, if it's red, is probably in a red sign, like a fire sign. So that's what I would be looking at if you were born in Leo or Sagittarius or Aries with the sun there. Yeah, because the sun doesn't move retrograde. We all go around the sun. So it's always going to go across the ecliptic steady around the year. If the sun went retrograde, I would be concerned, actually. That would be really interesting. Exponents. That's what I was looking for, Hunter. Exponents are the numbers at the top of numbers when you think of something to the third power, which is actually cubed. So it's the opposite of that. Let me see something. Look at that. Angela, thank you. Sharing the full desktop does help make it easier to see. I just now cannot see my notes, which is fine. I have most of it memorized, and I will stop sharing the screen when I need to. Okay, so Amber, I appreciate you. Let's see. Okay, Jet is saying, I'm feeling called to explore astrocartography, and I wonder what resources you would suggest for that. Astrocartography is a new concept. Also, I am going to call it astro mapping because it is a copywritten phrase. So I do not want to get in trouble for that. So astro mapping, same thing, just different word, is something that was developed in recent decades. So this does not have traditional sources. It doesn't have the hundreds of years of exercise and experimentation that other concepts have. However, a lot of people use it. The limiting thing about it to me is if you're someone like me, you're only ever going to be happy if you live in Siberia or something. So take it lightly because sometimes it can feel a little bit limiting if you say, well, I only want Jupiterian themes in my life. Maybe that's not the life you came here for, right? So that's why Jupiter is through the Arctic Circle and you hate the cold, because you came here to experience other things and it's encouraging you that way. Different resources for that. I know astro-seek.com does include astro mapping. I know Astro Gold has it. A lot of programs have them now. But again, you're going to want to understand, this is very important. You're going to want to understand the basics of astrology first, because just because you've got a Jupiter midheaven line somewhere does not mean you're setting yourself up for the Jupiterian benefic success that you would expect for just Jupiter and just the midheaven. The condition of your Jupiter is going to have a say in that. If you have a Jupiter in detriment, it may not be the thriving lifestyle that you would hope for. You may be better off finding a planet that's better conditioned in your chart. So always start with foundational stuff with astrology. Don't skip the basics to get into the fun, different tools that we can have. We have so many fun tools that we can use with astrology, and understanding the basics is always going to make everything else make more sense. I would use astro-seek.com if you're getting into exploring it, because it's a free resource, but he does a really good job and he's super passionate about it. So that is the resource that I would give. Yes, of course, there's always plenty to learn. One of the reasons that I love being an astrologer is I'm never going to actually know everything, and that's kind of nice. I had to reach this point. There was a point in my studies where I was like, I'm never going to know anything. Oh man. And now I'm like, no, I have something to like occupy myself for the rest of my life. This is great. So hopefully that helps. Yes. Okay, cool. So Christina is saying that you do have the sun in a fire sign, which is why there's red in context in your chart. The sun is not retrograde. Good. I'm glad that we made that make sense. Cool, cool, cool. Yes, Angela, thank you for making this easier to see. Haha. Awesome. Where would you start if you were a complete beginner in astrology? I would start by deciding what kind of astrology I want to learn. This is the most important thing that gets skipped a lot. Astrology has blossomed in many ways into different schools of thought. The same way anything that falls in the ninth house. So if you look at where Jupiter is on this chart, right up here, this is the ninth house. The ninth house covers higher learning or higher concept things like religion, like politics, like anything you shouldn't bring up at the dinner table, but also like publishing, higher education, those kinds of things, including astrology. Higher magic would show up there too. The more fine-tuned magic, not better magic, just more picky. And so, yeah. So if you were just beginning with astrology and you were looking for where do you want to start, you want to pick your path. It's kind of like when you're just beginning a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, you got to decide what role you want to play. And therefore you want to look at astrology and say, what do I want to do with astrology? What do I want astrology to actually be a tool for? And from there, you'll be able to say, well, I want to learn about, literally fate and fortune and how to do timing techniques and all that stuff. Hellenistic astrology has got your back. If you're looking for a teacher, I volunteer. I have a student study group and I adore it. It's literally one of my favorite things in the whole world. If you're looking for something a little bit more on the evolutionary side, and not like Darwin evolution, but like soul evolution, there is a branch of astrology for that of course is a newer development, but they have their techniques. And so you want to find people and you can search, evolutionary astrology teachers, evolutionary astrology classes, evolutionary astrology podcasts. A really good starting resource that interviews a lot of astrologers from across the board is the Astrology Podcast by Chris Brennan. It was one of the ways I got started after I actually studied with Chris Brennan. Chris himself is a Hellenistic astrologer, but talks to astrologers of all paths. So you can get a lot of information there and some really good foundational knowledge to set you up for success on whatever road you choose. But that is my one piece of advice. If you're going to start learning astrology, decide what you want to do with astrology and go from there. You want to make sure that you have that figured out. Later, you can learn all the paths. If you have the time, go for it. Again, I study Hellenistic astrology and I also study Persian astrology, medieval astrology, the older, more traditional stuff in astrology and astrological magic. I will never be done learning. There's so much for me to learn here. I can stay in it for as long as I want and the water will never get cold. That is true for pretty much all of the paths. So yeah. So Nancy, I hope that that helps. And to anybody who's listening, I hope that helps as well. I've been pushing up against not bringing politics up at the dinner table. I think that thought process has led, yeah, honestly, my ninth house is stacked. I always bring those topics up at the dinner table. I always bring those topics up everywhere. It's almost compulsive for me. So yeah, it's very, this may be the time where we draw ourselves into the ninth house a little bit more and talk a little bit more about those topics and connect on higher levels. Your ethics also fall in there, right? So it may be a really good time to sit at the table where they're talking about the ninth house topics that you want to be talking about as well. Maybe it's not bringing those topics up at the dinner table. Maybe it's sitting at the dinner table where those topics are already being brought up, and that shows you who you want to be sharing your meals with. Sometimes it's both. It's going to be either or depending on your own situation. But yes, Hunter, I agree. All right, cool. So I think we're caught up on some of the questions here, which is great. What I'm going to do now, we're doing great on time. What I'm going to do now is go into Venus retrograde a little bit. Like I said, we finished up Mars retrograde. We're looking at Venus retrograde here. She's going to go retrograde on March 1st, which you can see over here now because Angela's amazing and helped us with our tech issues. So March 1st at 7:30-ish p.m. Eastern time, we're going to see Venus go retrograde later this week on Saturday. You can see it over here. By the way, if you are beyond wanting to use a free program for things and you would like to get into a really low-key, non-intimidating, but really useful and easy to use program, I do recommend Luna. It's a monthly subscription thing, but I do have a code that will be in the description here that'll get you 10% off. The reason I like it is because it is so easy to navigate and does give so much context. A lot of other programs don't quite do that yet. They expect you to use the program because it's kind of like video editing and Adobe programs, right? You don't get much of a tutorial. You just go in there and they expect you to know how to use the lasso tool. So when we come into these, Luna is a really great program and the developer of it is great. Not as Hellenistically inclined as I like yet, but there's a lot you can do with it that's going to take you really far, even as you get more advanced. This does not have astro mapping yet. I'm sure Kevin, the developer, will get there. We just do not have it yet. Cool. So what we're looking at again is Venus going retrograde. Now, pop quiz to anybody who's watching this. Venus is in Aries. Now, if in the chat you would like to share what's important about Venus being in Aries, pop off. Because there is something about Venus being in Aries, not just the fact that she is returning to the place where she was when I was born. So I have to go through a whole Venus return with her retrograding over my Venus, but also the fact that she is in a sign of the chart that is 3, 2, 1, not her favorite sign. So Venus rules 2 signs of the chart. She rules Taurus, which is the bull over here. Uranus is in it. And she also rules Libra, which are the scales. And so if we notice that Libra is exactly across the chart by 180 degrees from where Venus is going retrograde, then if she is in domicile at home in Libra, she is the opposite of domicile, the opposite of at home in Aries. This is called detriment. So we have Venus having multiple afflictions is the way that we would actually say this. She is not supported. Poor Venus has had a really rough couple years, to be very honest with you. And this one is not easing up on her. And I'm going to show you another reason why in a second. She is going retrograde in Aries. And eventually, if we go in here, you can also do the event coordinator and we're going to do sign changes. She's going to move backwards into Pisces. Pisces is actually a lot better for Venus. This is a sign where she is considered to be exalted. She doesn't rule it, but they love her here. So Pisces is Venus's favorite place to be in. When she goes back into Pisces, though, she will still be retrograde until she goes direct on April 12th. And so on April 12th, we see that she will go direct at 24 degrees of Pisces. Normally, this would be exciting to me as an astrological magician because I'm like, ooh, I know the exact degree of Venus's most exaltation is the 27th degree of Pisces, which is actually 26 degrees 0 to 26 degrees 99 because you've completed 26 degrees. So everything between 26 and 27 is the 27th degree. So I would look for her being at the 27th degree or 2600 to 2659. And I would get really excited and see if perhaps I could make a talisman for her. Exalted Venus on her exaltation degree. Like if the moon's in a good place and none of the malefics are being mean, rock on. Except here's what we know. She's going to take a while to speed up. Every click I make is a day here. And you can see that she just got off of the 24th degree. And who is she running into first? Saturn. So Venus gets out of her retrograde and immediately applies or runs toward Saturn. And you can see they stay conjunct each other till into the 28th degree. So I can't make a talisman of Venus at her exaltation degree because Saturn, the greater malefic, is sitting there and won't move, which is fine. Saturn is going to move into Aries later this year. And we can also see that Neptune finally moves into Aries also in April. I will talk about that later. This is a bigger moment societally, so we'll cover that in its own space. But Venus, when she moves direct, will be exalted. And the moon is also there, which is really nice. So there's going to be some nice opportunities to look in the sky and see Venus, Saturn, and the moon near each other. But not really the best for making a talisman at this point. So it's kind of like Venus just cannot catch a break whenever she is in situations that would normally be helpful for her. She should start catching a break in Libra season now that the nodes are finally out of there. So we'll see how that goes later this year. All right, so let me just pop back. We went through a couple of the dates. Venus is retrograde, when she goes back into Pisces, when she finishes her retrograde. And then there's one more date that is significant because she does, of course, have to go back into Aries for a while. That will be on April 30th. So on April 30th, Venus is going to go back into Aries and actually move through there and finish her journey there on the same day of a really lovely Moon-Jupiter conjunction, which we love. She will then get out of detriment and move on into being in domicile on June 6th. So June 6th, Venus is no longer retrograde. She's no longer in a bad sign. She's where she likes to be because she rules Taurus. So we get Venus in domicile, direct. She's far enough away from the sun that she's not under the beams. This is a good time for Venus, especially until she runs into Uranus, but we've got the whole sign before she gets there. So we love this for Venus. Venus is out of sight from Saturn. As you can see, Saturn here has just come into Aries at that point. This closeness between Saturn and Neptune is something I will be talking about for a full year. Don't worry about it yet. We will cover it in its own topic. She will have this square aspect from Mars to contend with, but that's okay. It happens. We're just glad they're both direct, and Mars at this point is out of Cancer, so also not as afflicted. So if you think back with me for a second, when we come to right now, we have Saturn, who, take it or leave it, in Pisces. Mercury does not like being in Pisces. Mercury is actually detriment and fall in Pisces, not Mercury's favorite look. Venus is in detriment in Aries. The moon today, as we're recording this, is in Capricorn, but will move to Aquarius later. Capricorn is the moon's detriment sign. And opposite the moon, we have Mars in the sign of Mars's fall, with Jupiter also in the sign of detriment. Can you see why it's been a hard year so far? Because the planets have been struggling. And so anything that corresponds with what they can offer us, if you think about the planets as deities being like, here, have all this stuff that I can give. They've been giving us rotten stuff. It's because that's what they have, but they're giving it anyway, right? So after April, into May, and especially into June, I get a lot more optimistic. I get a lot happier, and so do the planets. So there's a lot to see there, right? And we will cover this again as it goes on. But Venus retrograde in March, we have Venus retrograde, we have 2 eclipses, the Aries ingress, and a Mercury retrograde to contend with. All of those happening, of course, with Venus in detriment and Mercury in detriment. There's a lot of enduring kind of energy there and a lot of intensity going along with those eclipses. So March is probably the big squeaky wheel of the year. It's also got that Aries ingress, which sets the tone for 2025 March through 2026 March for anywhere, depending on where you cast your chart for, right? So this begins the zodiacal year. It's a big deal, and it sets the tone. Now, at that day, no matter where you are, you're going to have a lot of planets, 2 of them retrograde. I actually have a whole video on this, so I'm going to let it go. I feel like that meme where it's like getting really upset and then being like, nope, I need to calm down. I do have a whole video on the Aries ingress free here on my YouTube. Check that out so you can get all the details. It's like half an hour long, and I don't want to go too far into this and not cover what we want to cover. when it's already covered there. So it's going to be a year of intense change on multiple levels, wherever you are. I cover it specifically for the United States because that's where I'm based, but just know a lot of those themes, when they're not involving the house number, the house of the planets, those themes stand true across the board. You just want to cast the chart for the capital of whatever nation you find yourself in, or the capital of the state/province you find yourself in, to narrow it down even further. Cool. So with that, let me see um, what we've got going on in the comments so that I can catch up here a little bit. All right, good, good, good. Yeah. So going back to Jet's question, I'm glad you asked too. It's really important to get context. Questions are how we learn things. I always welcome them. Yeah. Misty says, one of my guides dropped a validation in a really fun way via a song on the radio. What fun validations would you recommend requesting? Um, I know M likes to request rainbows. I get specific depending on the situation. My relationship with my guides is a very, very awkward conversation a lot of the time. They'll often be like on topic, and so usually lines of songs will respond to something I've just asked out loud of my guides. So that happens a lot. Um, I love using music for that because it can be so random and it can be so useful. But literally anything works. Music to me is my most fun. I once had an aspect pattern in a chart be a sign from a guide when I asked them to show me a Merkaba as a sign. And then they were like, I said to Dan, my husband, you're going to have to keep an eye out for a Merkaba today because I requested that as a sign from this entity that I'm engaging with to know that I can trust them. And Dan was like, have you looked at your own chart? Because of course that six-sided star is in my chart. And so when we pulled it up, all I heard in my head was, ha, since before you were born, like they had planted the hint there that long ago. And now we work together quite frequently. So it was a really good trust exercise, but you can let it be whatever it needs to be. They will also find ways to let you know, however it needs to work. Validation is usually a, hey, you're doing great, buddy. So you want to set something up that's like regular for that so they can check in with you, or to say, hey, I want you to pay attention for a second. So something like M's idea of a rainbow, letting that be like, oh, I see a rainbow. Does anybody need me? Is an option. Or, oh, I see a rainbow. I'm on the right path. Yay, me. Lots of people will use angel numbers for this. It's an excellent way to do that. Yeah. Cool. Going through some questions here. Thank you guys so much for being so engaged. This is going to make the podcast episode so much more interesting for people. I appreciate it. Yeah, so we had our pop quiz. I lost my place. There we go. Yeah, Venus in Aries, Jessa, is also my placement. So I relate. She she's not I've talked to people about this because I don't hate my Venus. I just know that my Venus is not going to set me up for Venus things. You're not going to see me in Pretty in Pink anytime soon, right? You're going to see me doing countercultural Venus things. I'm a non-binary ace person. So that is my Venus in Aries saying, hey, I don't do beauty the same way other people do. Or, hey, I don't value things the same way other people do. It's not wrong. It's just different than the stereotype or baseline definition of things. And so, yes, she's not going to set me up for easy romantic stuff, but also in living my life, I've also learned to value different things. If that's not what's going to be in my paint set, I'm going to use the other colors to paint, and I'll use red, for instance, sparingly, and it will be accents to my life, and that's okay. We learn to live with our charts in the first 30 years of our life, especially. And my phone just went off, so hopefully that helps somebody. And so it's not that you're going to be ruined. You should never be afraid of your chart, especially the older you get. You've survived it this long, right? You've already done this. If you knew about astrology or not, astrology is still there running in the background like a program, right? It's your elevator music of life. If you didn't know it was there, you would still have gone through a Mars retrograde these last few months. What difference does it make, right? If you want to be able to work more alongside it and get to see sort of the universe working and get into the cogs and the gears of it, absolutely, it's super helpful. If you've been having a really hard time, it's so helpful to know that, hey, after February 23rd, stuff will change, or that's my light at the end of the tunnel. That's how I use it. When I'm working with clients, I like to identify what planet is responsible for the rough time that they're in or for whatever it is that they're trying to look for. And then we find a timeline and we write a story with it. We decide how we're going to make that play out. And we hope that, everything that we plan can work out that way. And if it doesn't, we work around it as well, knowing that it's probably in alignment with what we're supposed to do. Again, I looked at my solar return chart last year. I saw the Lord of my year with Mars in Aries, and I knew that I was going to have some accidents that year. Rather than accidents, I decided to schedule some surgeries I had been planning, and that helped. There have also been more minor accidents, but on the dates where something big would have happened, according to my astrology, there was a surgery there, and so something big did happen, but it was because I chose it or because I took that opportunity to choose it. So that's where some of the magic can come in to using astrology that way. Nothing to be worried about. You can use astrology in your favor, but just know whatever you're doing, you're going to be okay because if you knew about it, if you didn't know about it, you'd still be living your life. So I don't want us to get too stressed out because we're aware. That is a rite of passage when you're doing astrology. Don't worry about it. Like we've all been there. This is where I've landed after kind of going through that process. So I hope it helps you too and makes that process a little bit more graceful for you. Um, what is the significance of Venus in a given house? How can we understand what Venus will affect us these next 6 weeks? Okay, so there are 12 houses. So I'm going to encourage people to look up keywords for those 12 houses because I don't want to go through all 12 of them. Um, what you're going to want to look for, though, is Aries. Where is Aries in your chart? Which house? If it is in the first, the 10th, the 7th, or the 4th, making that cross across the chart, either going horizontal or vertical, then you may notice it more. Also, if Venus is a time lord for you this year at some level or another, you may notice it more. If she has a time lord, you'll notice it because she is in charge of your year. If she is in an angular sign, you'll notice it because she is occurring in a part of your chart that is more noticeable for you. Those angular points are the points where activity happens in our chart, right? Especially the first, 10th, and 7th. The fourth house, not as much. It's still there. But when it happens in that first, the house at the 9 o'clock position has a 1 with it. The seventh, exactly opposite the first. Actually, I'll show you right here. The first is right here. The seventh, the 10th, and the 4th on the chart here on the screen. And so the 10th, of course, is at the 12 o'clock point on the chart. If it's in one of those places, if you have Aries there where Venus is going to be, or perhaps even Pisces, as in the case of this chart that we're actually showing, then you'll notice it more because she's going through a point in your houses in your chart where activity happens. So if you have a stage and this is the stage that you're always watching, it's the channel you're always watching, you're going to have characters playing, right? You're going to have some kind of activity happening. So that's what I would keep an eye out for. If you have what we call the cardinal cross, which is the signs of Aries, Cancer, um, Libra, and Capricorn, those are the cardinal signs because that's just one of their qualities. Or if you have a mutable cross, which is Pisces, Mercury, Virgo, and Sagittarius, if you have those on your angles in some way or another, then this is going to be angular for you at some point. Refer to the dates earlier. And then you might notice it more. And again, of course, if Venus is a time lord for you on some level, then you might also notice it more, regardless of where she is. You can also see if Venus is in a prominent position of your solar return chart, which is the chart on your birthday for the moment when the sun came back to the point where the sun was when you were born. Again, this is why it's really helpful to have an astrologer do a lot of this for you, because that's where you get into this is how it actually makes sense. Social media, we try to say, okay, if it's angular, that's the easiest thing I can offer you, but it's very surface level. So I try to give you a little bit more here on the podcast. Cool. Um, cool. Yeah. Amber says, I get spiritual validation from conversations syncing up. Literally last live with KristaLyn said something that I needed to hear. Yay. I love being part of people's validation. So thank you for letting me know about that. Yeah. Deity sass is real, Christina, for sure. Yeah. Happy early birthday to Jessa. I'm going to say that out loud. That's fun. Uh, cool. Thank you, Jet. Let's see. Just catching up on the chat here. I'm almost there. Uh, Amber says astrology. Don't worry about it. In the New York City Brooklyn accent, which I am not good at, so I'm not going to butcher it for you, but you can imagine it. I'm sure Amber could do it very skillfully. Rocio says, I noticed so many sevens on Friday. I saw 777 and 777 on a TikTok. Then later that night, 777 while in a number 7 donating chair. What are some things that 7 could mean in numerology? 7 is a number of change. It usually means you're going through something, like you're going through, so often it means like you're going through something that feels hard right now, but it's a transitional period. So in numerology, 7 is a number where it's like, dun, 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 you're going through change. There's stuff changing and it's evolving into something. Not necessarily a bad thing. 7 is also lucky in other cultures. So I would ask first, rather than numerology, I would ask what 7 means for you. And then if you don't have context for 7 on your own, I would start looking into other techniques that could give you some symbols to use. But always go with yourself first. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad that the longer explanation of how to know if Venus retrograde is going to affect you uh, is helpful. I often worry that I get too wordy with it, but this is long form video, so we have that grace that we get to use. Jessa, it'll be really nice to see you in Iceland. I'm looking forward to that. Kay asks, will the Venus retrograde reflect anything back from last Venus retrograde in Leo? Not necessarily last Venus retrograde in Leo. However, you bring up a great point that I wanted to bring up, Kay, so thank you. Venus has what's called a minor period of 8 years. So Venus will go through the zodiac every, I think, like 18 months or so. She goes around a full circle. However, in her relation to the sun, she has a period of 8 years. So it takes her 8 years to get back to exactly where she was in this sign related to where the sun is in whatever sign it is in the chart. For this situation, if we want to say that Venus, let's go back to Venus retrograde's start date on March 1st. There we go. March 1st. There we go. Okay, so we'll go to Venus retrograde's March 1st here. So she's at 10 degrees of Aries. The sun is at 11 degrees of Pisces. The last time this happened approximately would have been 8 years ago. So somebody help me out with the math in the chat. 2025 minus 8 is, I'm really asking for help. I actually can't do mental math. So I'm pretty sure that that's going to give us 2017-ish. So yes, 2017. Cool. So 2017 was the last time that Venus retrograded in Aries related to the sun as she is now. So you're actually going to want to throw yourself back to 2017 and ask what happened back then during Venus's retrograde. And for that, then you'll say, okay, what was I going through at that time? I can already tell you it's coming up for me already. And you'll say, okay, I was going through this kind of thing in my life. Now, we can say it was around the same time of year because the sun was in Pisces at the time, right? So we know that it was Pisces season, which would put it sometime in the February-March period in 2017 into likely April or so. So think about that frame of time and see what was going on for you, particularly in things that Venus does, right? If it's something like communication and transportation, that was Mercury, right? We want to look at how your relationships were doing, how your art was doing, what your interests were, how you were maybe spending your money. Again, the house topic is going to play a role here as well. You know, if she's in the second house, it might lean more toward the money. If she's in the fifth house, it might lean more towards romantic relationships, those kinds of things. So 2017 is when you want to take a look at in the March to April timeframe and ask yourself what was going on for me then. she has this really cool cycle that when you chart it all over the place, she creates like a 7-point star, I believe. And so it's really pretty, but that also means that when she retrogrades, it's often in the same element of sign. Mercury is doing the same thing. Mercury is also retrograding primarily in fire signs. Mercury is going to retrograde in Aries and then back into Pisces. Mercury last retrograded in Capricorn and then back into Sagittarius, then previously in Leo. And so they're going through these trines. Venus is doing it projected over a longer period of time. So yes. So we are down to 5 minutes left. Thank you guys so much. We have time for a couple more general questions. Let me know, did what we covered make enough sense? Is there anything that you're like, hey, in the last 5 minutes, can you help me understand this better? Because I want to make sure that this is helpful for everybody who's listening and watching. Yeah, cool. Yeah, we will be back. Okay, so this actually is a good opportunity. You're not going to see a Monday Magic Mood Boost for a couple weeks until the 16th, hopefully, of March. I might be jet lagged, so I'm hoping I'll be here. I likely will be. You guys are really fun. So that will be the next Monday Magic Mood Boost live on my YouTube. But next week, you will get a podcast episode where we interview a sound therapist that is a human being who's very important to me. The following week, you will get a replay of one of Emily's lives, and then we'll be back. So you're not going to miss anything on the podcast. Don't worry, but we are going to have 2 weeks where we don't have a YouTube live. I apologize for that. The time difference would not make it ideal for anybody. Trust me. So let's hold on to our good vibes in this period of time. Venus retrograde is going to begin. We're going to have one full lunar eclipse. I have that explained again in that Aries ingress video, so you're already covered. I already have posts scheduled to come out on all of my platforms to guide you through those. So you will be held no matter what, because I planned ahead to make sure that the content is there and I will be able to respond to comments and things while I'm abroad. So I'm still connected, just can't produce new stuff while I'm there. So for the new moon this week, that video, I actually have a full video that will be coming out probably tomorrow. It's set to launch on YouTube. You can also check out my newsletter, which you can get that will give you moon updates for every new and full moon. So between social media and the newsletter, you are fully covered and I've got your back. Do not worry. I'm happy to be able to provide all that stuff for you guys. Thank you, Jessa. I'm really glad. Thank you, Liz. I'm glad this made sense. Woohoo. Oh, yeah, Misty, that's a very bittersweet story. I hope that this year is gentler with you and that you have a nice time. Cool. Cool. Yay, Egypt. Still doesn't feel like you're going. I'm excited to get there and I'm excited to see you, Rocio. It's going to be great. Yeah. All right. This is wonderful. I'm really glad that you guys are having a good experience. That means a lot to me. In just a minute, we're going to any comments on the new tomb discovered in Egypt. I'm going to be asking our guide Hani about the new tomb discovered in Egypt in the Valley of the Kings. We'll probably learn a lot there. We are going to be visiting the Valley of the Kings. Hani, of course, is an excellent Egyptologist and archaeologist, as well as our guide. So we'll learn more about that. We'll probably tell you about it in our post-Egypt podcast episode, which will be really fun. Plus, I'll be able to debrief a little bit on my live when we get back as well. Yeah. So thank you all. And since this was a Alchemist Inkwell podcast episode, I hope that you take the energy of this week and everything that is to come and that you want to do it with me. 1, 2, 3, go make some magic. Thank you guys so much. I will see you again soon.